Welcome to our LB's Author Chat. If this is your first time live on an author chat or watching a recording, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, LB the Lover of Books. You're going to find 37 maybe now author chats uploaded. So you will definitely find more books that you've read that you will enjoy hearing from authors there. Also, you can always check on Instagram for what's coming up or on Facebook, but I'm betting you're going to find lots coming up that you're going to enjoy. All right, now I want to introduce this awesome author. She was born and raised in Anaheim, Saskatchewan, on the Hamlet Plains of Canada in a small, tightly knit Roman Catholic community. She was very fortunate to have parents who encouraged learning about other religions and cultures, and books were the window that expanded her world. Years later, she and her husband began restoring an old plantation home in rural Virginia. This may start sounding a little familiar. When researching the history of the house and the land, she discovered an old map, and there was a notation that read Negro Hill. Those words captured her so that gradually she set aside everything else to pursue researching and writing of the story that is now The Kitchen House, and one of my all-time favorite books. There was a character in The Kitchen House that stayed with her, and Jamie seemed to insist that she tell his story next and glory over everything. But after those two books, as you all know, she started researching the true life of Crow Mary, a Native woman who carried a Colt revolver and a studded belt, and she wasn't afraid to use it. And we can't wait to hear more about Crow Mary. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. We are so glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Laura Beth, for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
Well, are you in Virginia right now?
I am. I just recently moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, actually about a year ago. It feels recent, but we moved here about a year ago. So we're new here.
Very good. And so how long did you live in Canada, and when did you, I guess, move to the US?
Oh, gosh. In 1970, I came to the US, but 30 years ago, my husband and I came down to Virginia.
Okay.
So we've been here in Virginia for about 30 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have to know because, you know, this is such an interesting topic. You're from Canada. You went back to Canada to tell this story. How did you first hear about? Was this something you had in history classes, or is this something that you heard from a friend in a reading? Where did Crow Mary's story first begin for you?
Yeah, I had never heard anything about Crow Mary or about the incident actually of what happened. But I was out every year. I went back to visit my parents in Saskatchewan, and this back in about 2001. They suggested we go out to the Cypress Hills to see where the Northwest Mounted Police had built their first fort. And it wouldn't have been my very first area of interest, because the Western history just had never really held that much for me. But that day, I was with my parents, and it was a wonderful day trip for us. So we drove along. I don't know if you've ever been to, it's a prairie province. So there are areas of Saskatchewan that are very flat. But as you come to this one area in Saskatchewan called the Cypress Hills, there are these beautiful rolling hills with fir trees, covered with fir trees. And it was just this remarkably beautiful area. So I was stunned when I first saw that. But there, the Northwest Mounted Police had rebuilt or done a reenactment, basically. We're doing a reenactment of that fort that they had built back in 1855, I believe, something like that. And while we were there were docents who were dressed as these police. But over on one of the smaller hills, one of the lesser hills, there was a young woman who was standing, and she was dressed as a Crow Native woman. And I was drawn to that. So I went over and I listened to her, and she introduced herself, and she said, "My name is Crow Mary, and I was here in 1873 when my husband, Abe Farwell, had one of the forts. I was newly married at the age of 16, and I was here when that massacre happened where 40 Assiniboine natives were murdered. While that was going on, while this assassination was going on, the massacre, 4 or 5 of those women, 5 of the Assiniboine women, were taken captive, and they were taken back to one of the forts. And there I knew that they were going to be raped and murdered. So I went with my 2 guns, and I by myself, and I saved those women. And I had this chill go through my body. I still get it every once in a while. I just
Yes.
had this chill go through my body, and I thought, I meant to write her story. So that was the very beginning for me when I knew that she was next, that she would be in that she'd be coming up for me, that I would be writing her story. I knew that then.
What year was that?
Back in 2001, I was
2001.
still, I was still writing The Kitchen House.
Right. I was going to say, so that was a bit of an overlap. That sort of
Yep.
is a seed planted.
Right.
And then when you're writing a book like The Kitchen House and you're having to do research on a
Mhm.
very historical novel there, do you just hold on to the idea or does it percolate? Do you start researching it or do you compartmentalize these books?
Well, I had by then already done the first draft of The Kitchen House. So my mind started to race ahead to Crow Mary because I just found her a story just fascinating. And I really wasn't even sure that she actually had lived. So I started to dip into some of the research at that time. And then through the years, I kept going back, and I would go back to Montana to the Crow Reservation and meet with people there who would give me more information. So by the time, well, I actually thought when I finished writing pardon me, The Kitchen House, that I would start to write Crow Mary's story because I didn't have any idea of Jamie even in existence.
Mhm.
I always, people ask me after The Kitchen House, what happened to the characters? And I'd say, I have no idea. But I kind of did because every once in a while I would see Jamie in my mind's eye over on this side, and I knew that he was a wealthy aristocrat. I knew he lived in Philadelphia, and I knew when I was seeing him, he was about 33 years old.
Mhm.
That I just knew that. I don't know how I knew it. I just knew it. Over on this side, every once in a while, I would see Suki. And I knew by the way she was walking and by the way she was dressed that she was still enslaved. So that's all I knew about anything else of the characters in The Kitchen House. No intention of writing their story or anything else because I didn't think I had a story.
Mhm.
So went out when I finished The Kitchen House, went out to Montana, and there I began to do, or I was going to really begin to do research. And I did do some, but I couldn't feel her. I couldn't, and I knew in order for her to be able to tell her story, I was going to have to immerse myself in her lifestyle. And I just couldn't feel it. I could write the notes down, but I couldn't feel it. And I couldn't feel it early on. I knew this because Jamie from The Kitchen House was throwing a blanket over the whole thing. And he was standing in front of it and he was saying, no, you have to write my story next. And it was so strong that I knew that I had to change course. And I did. So I next then went to Philadelphia, began to do research, wrote Jamie's story, and then I went back to Montana again and began research on Crow Mary's story.
So
So
what's the
that
timeline for Jamie's story then? So when did you wrap up?
in 2016, it
Okay.
was published, Jamie. But throughout, even while I was researching Jamie, I was still going out to Montana
Okay.
periodically. Because a lot of times when I was going home to visit my family, I would swing by Montana and then gather more information, or I was reaching out to people. I had met some people early on, some of the elders, and I was communicating with them via email, or telephone. So that was working out well.
Okay, I want to dive into this research process because I assume this isn't your typical research that you can do because as was talked about in the forward by a relative, a lot of it's oral. So can you talk about what the different types of research were, what you felt was beneficial, what was the hardest part, and just give us, a bird's eye view of what it looks like to research the Crow people and specifically Crow Mary.
Yeah. Well, first I had to make sure that she existed if I was going to actually follow through on this. And to my great excitement, I discovered early on that she had lived and that she had been married to Abe Farwell, and that there were some facts that she was 16 when she first married him, and that she was Crow 100%. And so I then worked with that information. Every time I get a little bit of information, I get so excited because there was little documentation about her, but there was documentation about the trials that took place. And at the second trial that took place up in Winnipeg, there's documentation of her testifying. And so I had these kinds of things that were bits and pieces in between of knowledge about her. I first reached out to, I believe I met first with a man I called the Crow Reservation Government Agency. It was called something like that. I honestly don't remember. And there, a man by the name of George Reed picked up the telephone. And he said that he was a Crow elder and he could answer some of my questions. And this was back in 2001. So I asked a few questions, but I said, I'm going to be coming out to the Crow Reservation. And I told him when, and he agreed to meet with me. So I drew up a list of questions, long list of questions that just off the top of my head, I needed to know. And I went out, met with him. There was a little bit of a story that went with that, but the short end of it, the short story is that he did meet with me. He sat with me, and I said to him, George, I don't want to offend you, and I don't know if some of these questions you're going to find offensive. So pardon me if that happens. So he said, go ahead. Meanwhile, he had a big black Stetson hat on when I met with him, and he kept it down and he wouldn't look me in the eye. And I didn't know then that married Crow men don't look married women in the eye. So he was sort of looking ahead, and we were sitting on this bench overlooking the beautiful Crow Reservation. And I just started to ask questions. And I had this long list of them. He answered every one of them. Sometimes he even took the pencil and piece of paper that I had, and he would do different diagrams to show me better, to explain things better. So he was really wonderful with me. I said to him, no, before I do my writing, I always pray. Is there a prayer, or is there a way that I should pray to invite Crow Mary into this? So he asked me how I prayed, and I told him I turned to the four corners of the world and pray for all of the people. And he said, that sounds good. And he said, but you should have some blessed sage. And I thought, well, okay, I'll see where I can find that. But I didn't say anything. I got home and I sent him a thank you note. And I've read this letter a couple of times now, so anyone who's already heard it, I apologize, but it really changed everything for me when he sent a letter back to me. So he wrote, now this is a man who has since gone to the other side camp. He was a number of years older than I am, and I'm 76, for anyone who wants to know. TMI, right? But here is his letter from me. Here is his letter. Kathy, thanks for the card. It was very thoughtful. I had sent him a thank you note. I have sent you 2 stems of sweet sage. Better use it all at once or use it sparingly, because that is all I can do for this one cause. My prayers and thoughts are with you in your quest for information about my people. Don't be alarmed if you feel a presence or if you detect something. My father always said I have 4 mothers who watch over me. It is from these powers that I am allowed to use this sweet sage. If the good Lord wills, I may get to visit with you again come January. Remember that I am with you in your wants, wishes, and desires. Take care. Plays with his face. That was his native name. So that was the beginning of the incredible support that I had from all of the Crow people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Kelly on this. Like, definite chill bumps are popping up. It sounds like you had the support of the Crow people from the first moment you stepped foot on Crow Reservation. It just sounds, I don't know, it just sort of took my breath away, his response. And it sounds like they accepted you as a storyteller for
They
their
did.
people.
Yes, they did. Each of the Crow people that I met with, and some, like most of them were elders, but also I met with Nedra. I was so excited. One day I was doing research on ancestry.com and I thought I'll just try that. So I went on for Abe Farwell, and there I connected with Nedra Farwell Brown, and she is Crow Mary's great granddaughter. She's older than I am, but she is just a delight. We became really good friends. She came out to visit me for a week, and she was just a really nice woman. She looks a lot the way I might have thought that Crow Mary looked. Like she had some of the same features in my mind's eye, right? She's a beautiful looking woman. So Nedra was one of the women. And then I was introduced to another great great granddaughter, Diana Means, who went out and collected for me a whole portfolio. I don't think portfolio is the right word. Help me out if you can think of it. But it's like a book with sleeves in it, and she had gathered all of the herbs that her grandparents and ancestors would have used, and found them for me in the wild still, and told me how they would be used. And it was just wonderful. And she sent me home from Montana with that. So I had those kinds of resources to help me along the way.
Well, in the book, you talked so much about the smells of the land and of the animals and of the camp. And, having that be sent back with you from Montana, I think would just make it even more immersive for you as a writer to engulf in this, very nature driven story, because so much of it, we were right there on the land and experiencing it with Crow Mary.
Yeah, yeah. The land was, we were able to find the land that she and Abe had originally owned. So there was land there that had been Farwell's land. And I kept going back to it. We were given permission. I kept going back to it because it was acres and acres of just free land.
Mhm.
And I would just sit there and feel the stones and feel the soil. And I just couldn't get enough of it. For me, a lot of the soil, or the stories, I think, are held in the soil or held in the land. I don't know why I feel that. I just do. I did that with both of my other books. I felt that same thing. But in this instance, it was the same for me, where I just kept going back to her land. I just hated to leave it. So it played a big part in the story.
Well, definitely Crow Mary is your lead character, but I do believe that the land was right there next to her, as maybe more than even some of the other named characters, because we were finding out when berries were going to be ready, and when the moon and the stars and it just was so beautiful, and I think it made the experience for us readers just that much more wonderful.
Good. The Crow people love their land. They love their land. They used to have, oh, I hope I'm right with this, 33 million acres. After treaties started, they are now, by the time the treaties ended, they have 2.3 million acres.
Wow. Is the land, and Kelly wants to know, is the land, do they still own it? That Abe Farwell, is that still part of the reservation? Because I know in the story it was sold to the gunslinger, right? So where does that fit into today's history?
Yeah, it is no longer a part of the Crow Reservation.
Were you able to find where her ancestors, because I know she mentioned naming her children to have property towards the end, and we don't really see them except, the description by the mountains, but
Right.
were you able to locate that as well? And is that still part of her history?
Yes, it's part of the history, but it's also, I didn't feel that it was my business to invade that land. I felt that that was something that she gave to her children, and it was sort of the ending of the story. And, we tend to, at least I'm speaking for me as a white person, um, I don't think that we honor or respect property maybe in the way that we should. And I didn't want people going there, or just feeling like, oh, I want to go have a look, because I didn't go myself. I did not seek that out. I What was not on the Crow Reservation was her land, was her original land. But I don't feel that it's my business to go, and unless I'm invited, and I was not invited. I didn't ask, but I was not invited.
It was almost the same reaction when she and Abe Farwell put up fences and the Crow people came and had to go around because they weren't welcome then seeing those fences. And that sounds a little bit of the same reaction in a lot of ways that what fences now do to a tribe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, you brought up, obviously you are a white person and you are writing about a story that is not of the same culture as your own. So when you first heard the story, you had the chill bumps, you wanted to tell it. What are some of the concerns that are now running through your head thinking, I need to make sure I do XYZ, or I want to make sure I respect, like what was it that got you to say, yes, I'm going to tell the story?
You know, at the very beginning for any of my stories, my first concern was not that I was going to offend someone or that I was a white woman writing about slavery, as an example. My concern was that I could do the work. And it was only later when, as an example, when I was writing The Kitchen House, when people said to me, are you concerned about what the African American community is going to think about this? And I had enough African American friends that I could turn to, and I spoke to very openly and honestly, and they were all so encouraging and said, write the story. So I just went ahead and did that. Um, the same thing pretty much happened with Crow Mary. I really felt that I was meant to do it. And I felt and I feel all along with anything that I'm writing that if I'm meant to be doing this, if I'm really praying and asking for direction, which is what I do when I write these stories, then I'll be led to the right people and in the right direction. And that way I'll know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. With the Crow people, I talked to George first, and then I talked to Nedra, and they were both so encouraging. Then it was suggested that I go to see someone by the name of Janine Pease. She is the founder of the Little Bighorn College at the Crow Reservation. She founded that college. And I was really kind of intimidated to meet her because she had been spoken of so highly by so many people. And I thought, I don't know if she's going to approve of this necessarily, but I knew that I needed to meet with her and see what she thought before I really got too into it. So she agreed to meet with me, and we met at her office, which was on the campus of the Little Bighorn College. And I went there and I was expecting this formidable woman because can you imagine, as a woman, I don't remember the year the college was built, but can you imagine a woman founding a college, right? To say nothing about the fact that she's a Native woman founding a college. So I went in expecting this really formidable looking woman, and there she was in this tiny little office. I was expecting this lavish office, beautiful office. It was just a small little office, but she was sitting behind a desk, and she had the traditional Crow braids, and she had traditional Crow beaded earrings, and has a beautiful face, is a tall woman. And she was one of the most gentle, soft-spoken women that I've ever met. She was holding her grandchild in her lap, and her grandchild was asleep. Her little granddaughter was asleep. And until then, I had always, Crow Mary, in my research, I had come up with a couple of names that I had found for her. The Wolfers had called Crow Mary Mean Mary. So she wasn't afraid to use those guns. But if the Wolfers called her that, you can only imagine what she was like. So I had really seen her until that time as being a really tough woman. So when I saw Janine, I was sitting across from her desk, and I was looking at her, and I started to get tears in my eyes. And I said, forgive me, Janine, but you're just changing so many things, so many concepts that I had about this, or so many ideas that I had about this strong woman. And I realized then that Crow Mary didn't have to be this really mean, strong, tough woman, she could be exactly who she was and is in my mind's eye, the way I saw her. So did I answer your question? I don't
I mean,
remember.
what a wonderful representation for her people. And, it really says a lot about the Crow women in general. So I loved that she was your lead, and we definitely got an idea of who she was and what she stood for. I'm going to go ahead and get a couple of questions in because people are asking questions. Toby wants to know, how do you balance telling a fully honest historical story with adding fictional elements to make the story engaging to readers? And why write the story as a novel instead of simply a biography of this extraordinary woman? So two great questions there.
Yes, that was a good question, Toby. Um, when I first met this docent who was dressed as Crow Mary, I right away began to see different things happening. I'm not a channeler. I have no idea how this works for me, but I do call these inspirations, and I've had 3 now with the 3 books. I do call them spiritual gifts. And I do know that for me, my job is not to make up a story, but it is to do the research and to gather all of the information that Kathy can, that I can, so that the character, the protagonist, I even hate to call them protagonists because they're so real to me, but the character then comes, and once I'm full, once I'm all ready with all of the research, I can then say, which I did with her too, okay, I'm ready for you. I think I'm ready for you. And would you come and tell your story? So she then tells the story, and I follow behind. The characters that came, such as Stiller and Jeannie, um, to me, they weren't fiction because she brought them in, she introduced them, and she was telling her story with them. But there's no documentation on either of them that I could find. So for that reason, I had to call it fiction because there were
Sorry.
I had to fill in too much to plus I'm not a biographer. I'm not a writer of biographies. That's just it sounds foreign to me. I need to do it the way it's given to me. And that's just my way. Yeah.
There
Did
was
that answer your question, Toby?
I think so. That was very good. Thank you. Another question, which I think is a little bit on the same token, is when you're speaking to the family, Erin Rose wants to know, if this is not appropriate, please, that's fine. But she said, did the family ask for you any of the sales of this book, or do you donate to any of the causes or people that you write about? And along the same vein, when you're writing on a book about someone else's history or culture, how do you understand if it is too sensitive?
Well, there are certain things in Crow Mary's story that were too sensitive that I didn't write. And that is between me and the family. So also, I don't know that some of the members of the family knew some of the things that I did, that I uncovered. The money, the proceeds, no, I don't pay them for any of this information. I have not paid anyone for any information. Um, what I do with any of the money, I don't discuss.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we have some other questions. When you talk about your research, you went to Montana, but you also wrote about an Indian school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Is that something you also had to research on? Did you go out there? Because, there's been more talk about these Indian schools and how horrible the children were treated, but Susie decides to want to stay there, and appreciates that education. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about those Indian schools.
Yes. Well, it was suggested also that I write a sequel about the schools and about Bud and Bud's experience there and Susie's experience there. The children were, in truth, stolen, and Bud did escape the school and find his way home by following the railroad tracks. And Susie did stay and got her education and came home as a nurse. She married John Smith, and they lived on the reservation, and she used her nursing education to help her people. So all of those are facts. Those things all happened. I did go up to the Carlisle School a couple of times, and I went up there to get a feel for the place. They no longer have, they just have barracks, but they no longer have that open to the public. But they did have a cemetery where there were children that were buried, and they had their native name of their particular nation, and they had their native name written on there was a little cross that they each had. And there were some little animals, there were stuffed animals that were sitting on the graves themselves. And I just cried. It was just really so touching. I spoke to the woman who was heading up the whole research. They have a wonderful research database there. And she came to me. I told her what I was about, what I was looking for. And she said, Kathy, do your research. Whatever it is that you find, write the truth. Just write the truth. And she pretty much just opened it up for me and said, just whatever you find. So when I spoke to Janine about it, Janine said, yes, there are horror stories, many, many horror stories, but also there was education that was given to us, and we needed the education in order to be able to understand the treaties, as an example, and what was happening to us. So there are all of these different sides to one very hot topic at this point, as you can imagine.
Well, you said that someone's asked you to write a novel on those schools. Are you considering it, or is that something you're just not interested in and are already onto another character in your mind?
It isn't that I wouldn't be interested. It's that I don't feel it's my business. I think that there are too many people. Some of the schools closed down in 1960. So there are still many people alive who have experienced that and who are in a place to be able to best tell that story. So I feel that Crow Mary was written that many years before, had lived that many years before. So I felt I could take that on. But I don't think anything this recent is my business. I'm not in a place to do that. It isn't my place to do that.
I totally understand that. And I think it is such a hot topic right now. And I think we hopefully will hear more of those first narratives coming out of that community.
Yes.
CQ has a question here. It was impressive to me how honest the book was regarding the dominance of both Abe and the Crow males. Example, Abe was going to name their children and did not want Indian names. How the Crow women had to speak through their Crow males when speaking to others. Did you feel any frustration that then, as now, women as strong as they were and are, were nonetheless forced to acquiesce to the men, to lose their native names, to follow when and where the men wanted to go?
Actually, for me, when I go in to understand a culture, I do my very best to not go in with a biased mind, to just look at it and read it and understand it and try to feel it. It was a different world. It's a whole different culture, and it wasn't for me to judge. So I did my best to just allow her voice to come through me and to have her tell her story from her perspective. And how that played out, well, that's in the book, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
did you find, and this was Selena had this, which scene or chapter in the book was your favorite and why? And then I think someone may have asked the opposite. Was there one that was the hardest for you to write?
Oh, well, I'll start with the hardest. And of course, that was where she went in to save those women. I cried over that. I paced. I didn't want to write it in the worst way. I just didn't want to deal with it. But it was, as you know, a pivotal point in her life and an act of bravery that to me was just astounding, that a 17-year-old girl would go in and face these men who would have killed her as soon as looked at her. And that would have been the end of it. But I mean, the bravery that must have taken for her. So that really was, but I got through it. And then each time when I would rework it, it would become a little bit easier. But those first couple of drafts were really, really difficult. What did I like? I I liked Major. I don't know if I have this picture. I don't. Irvine, Major Irvine. I had a picture of him here, but it's not handy enough. I love that guy because when I started to do research on him, he actually lived, he was there, he was a big part of the trials that took place. And I love the interaction between Irvine and Crow Mary. So, and I love the relationship that I love the way he kept looking at her all the time. And if you see it the way I do, I see it like a movie. It plays out like a movie. So I'm watching these people going back and forth, and I kept seeing him looking at her in a way of almost disbelief and yet admiration. And at the end, he absolutely admires her. But and she just has no patience with him whatsoever. She just can't believe that a man would be that naive about women. So that was a favorite relationship for me. And I liked him because when I started to do research, one of the things that I found, one of the statements that I found was they were hesitant about promoting him in because I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something like he was maybe too kind-hearted to be able to push things forward. So I just really loved him. Yeah.
I loved the relationship that he ended up having with Susie, at the
Yeah.
end with that really warmed my
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah.
Um, all right, we have some others. I'm just going to keep going because people have some great questions here. And this is going back to the research. Selena said, what is something about Crow Mary that only you know and may have been left out of the book that you would like to tell us?
Well, I think I've already told you, she was known as Mean Mary by the Wolfers, and I just loved that. When I read that, I thought, oh, you go. I just loved the idea that the Wolfers would call her Mean Mary. I think I included in the book about Hardwick and the men, something that took me by surprise, those young Wolfers. Hardwick was only 26 years old when this massacre happened. And I was really surprised to learn that now they're doing research on these men and they're feeling that a lot of them were suffering from PTSD because they had been over fighting in the Civil War and then came out west after that. So they were having a real hard time adjusting and they were bloodthirsty is what they were. And so that was part of the information that I thought was interesting. That I might have included in some ways in the book, I'm not sure.
Yes, I think you did because we knew how young he was, but it just seemed like even Abe and Stiller were talking about a little bit about what we now know as PTSD after
Yeah.
the war and how Abe wouldn't even discuss that.
Mhm.
All right, let's see. We have another one here. It's a very powerful book, Janelyn says. Red Fox was my favorite character. Is he based on a real character?
Red Fox is based on a real character. I don't know exactly where he fit in, but I have a picture of Crow Mary. If you go onto any of my social media, Instagram or Facebook, and if you look there, we do something, my daughter does my social media, and we do something called Behind the Book. And there we post pictures that came to me through my research. And one of those pictures is of Crow Mary standing with Susie. And Susie's just a little girl at the time. But there is one, a foot, a moccasin that's sort of off to the side, sticking out. And I was told that was Red Fox. So I could find out very little about him, but I did know that he had a close relationship to Crow Mary.
I agree, Janelyn. I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And when he came back on the property, when she has the strychnine ready to go, and he has, as her elder, basically saved her from having to do that, it was chill bumps for me again because it's almost full circle because she saved him when she was a young child. He was going to basically starve, but in his grief, and that relationship was just such a beautiful one to see grow. And to me, that was one of my favorite, is when he was in the story. I always loved reading Red Fox as well.
Mhm.
Okay. If you have a live question you want to ask, get those ready. I'm going to ask Kathy some rapid fire questions. All right. These are just off the cuff. Some of them I was picturing answering it in the time period. Okay. If some of them may be modern, just go with it. It'll be fun. All right. US or Canada?
Oh, gosh. I'm in the middle, at the border.
At the border. Okay. Beef or buffalo?
Neither.
Okay.
I have
Sleep.
alpha gal. Have you ever heard of alpha gal? You don't want to eat anything with 4 legs.
All right.
Any meat. Yep, nope.
Sleeping inside or out?
In.
Horseback or wagon?
Horseback.
Cooking or beadwork?
Cooking.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
A plotter or a...
Pantser, you write by the seat of your pants.
Oh, a pants. Definitely not a plotter.
Okay.
Pants. Yep.
And last one, are you a morning glory or a nightshade?
Oh, nightshade. 100%.
All right. Thank you for that.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Who has a question here for Kathy that they would like to ask? I'm going to go back through the questions in the chat box as well. But if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. If not, I'm going to make sure I got all these questions because y'all had so many good ones coming. Yes, Janelyn, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you and you can unmute and ask.
Hello. Hi. Have you had any inspirations for your next book, or can you give us a clue in, or you're just resting? Because this was a great book. Loved it. Hated to see it end.
Good. Thank you for that. Do you know, I back in 2000, I had COVID. And I have, through the finishing of that story, I was struggling with long COVID. So that was 2020. So it's been a struggle for me to get this book out. And I promised myself while I was writing it, when I finish this, I'd give myself a break and then see what comes after that. But I look for direction, and to date, I haven't had any. So we'll see, right? But thank you for that. Yeah.
Great question, Janelyn. All right, I have another question while I'm waiting to see if anybody else has. So you received the blessed sage and you are going to pray to the 4 corners, but we never did hear. Did you actually burn the sage? And what was that experience like for you as you started writing this novel?
For sure, I used that sage. I stretched it out for a long time. I just used a little pinch when I was using other things as well, and I was using that. But I definitely used that. And my experience, the way, for me, the communication of the soul that wants to tell the story, wants me to tell the story, always comes through. When you mentioned getting chills before, that is always the way. If I'm saying something that is, even now when we speak, and if there's something that's important, or that is important to one person here, maybe to hear, I'll get a chill. I won't understand it, and I don't understand why that happens, and I don't understand why I was given this gift, but I recognize it as one. So I was very open to souls coming through to help me with this, and I believe that many did.
How wonderful. Let's see. Kelly also says, I burn sage in Palo Santo. It is very spiritual to me. So thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Yeah. Here's another question. Erin Rose wants to know if you have any favorite authors. We'll start with that one first.
Favorite authors. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you what I did. I wrote down, I do have them. So there are a couple that, because I was thinking about this. Sadiqa Johnson, are you familiar with her? She wrote A Yellow Wife, yeah, and House of Eve. She's
Yes.
really, I think she's a great, not only is she a good author, she's one of the dearest women you will ever meet. She's just really, you can look right into her soul. She's just a sweetheart. Rachel Beanland wrote This House is on Fire. Have you heard of that book at all?
I just talked to her for an author chat. Yes, she's
There you go.
wonderful. And both of those women, I believe, are in Virginia.
They
So
are.
kind
In
of
Richmond, not too
neighbors.
far away. Yep. And then let's see, Leah Weiss is a personal friend of mine, but she wrote a great book called If the Creek Don't Rise. And that's something that any of you, if you're interested, it's a good one to check out. Very, very good one. Anything by Dani Shapiro.
We just talked to her as well for Signal Fires. Yes, she's wonderful writer.
Oh, she's an
Yes.
amazing writer. I love her write. Anything by her. I'll take anything by her. And then there's an author by the name of Alexandra Fuller, who I don't think she's written anything recently in the last number of years. But she wrote a couple of books. One was called Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. It's a memoir. And another one is called Tales Under the Tree of Forgetfulness. I love that title. But Alexandra Fuller, I believe, is a really good writer. So I wouldn't hesitate to suggest reading some of her work. Any memoirs. I love memoirs. I love memoirs because I love learning about people.
I'm the exact same way. What are
Yeah.
you? She also wants to know what you're currently reading right now. Do you have time to read? Do you have what's on your bedside table?
I'm rereading Dani Shapiro's Inheritance. I just wanted to just familiarize myself again with her because I had her books, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Well, I think you may have to join some of our author chats because you like a lot of what this group likes to read.
Oh, really?
So you need to come in and listen when we have
Yeah.
them come in. So please join
For
us.
sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
There was a question at the beginning that I missed, but I think it's perfect timing now. Selena said, did you race to the end of Crow Mary or was it slow burn? Because for me, it was a race to find out what the ending would be. So what was your process like with writing?
I can't control it, and I can't decide. I need to follow behind with my pencil, and I need to be patient because the character themselves knows the story that they want to tell. And they will, as I said earlier, they'll pick and choose from my knowledge that I have. I've got a database, not necessarily always kept in here either, I might add, but I definitely have information. And I really don't know quite what's going to happen. And I think that's really important because it keeps me really fresh and excited and ready to sit down and do the hard work because it doesn't happen quickly. It takes years to have all of this put in place. And then usually a good year for me to write the first draft. So there's nothing rushed about it. Yeah.
Somebody said, Kelly, is your daughter like you and feels things and gets direction as well? I'm not sure.
My daughter is very much like me. She's a very sensitive woman. I think a lot of women are like that. We maybe have had to shut that down, but I don't know about you, but I can walk into a room and I can sense it. I can feel it, can't you?
Mhm.
Yeah. And you can look at someone and they can have a smile on their face, but you know they're having a hard time.
Yeah.
And I think that's just part of our nature. But I also have opened up that stream consciously because I had to for these stories. I had to be open to it, and I welcomed it. And so I pray and I ask for guidance that it only comes from God, and then I do what comes. So, but my daughter, yes, my daughter is very similar. She's a very, very sensitive, kind person. Oh, well, that says a lot about myself. Sounds like I'm bragging. I'm sorry about that.
Not
Describing
at
my
all.
daughter, not myself. Describing
I
my
think
daughter.
it's Beautiful to talk about your daughter that way.
Yeah.
CQ says, I loved how the prologue replicated itself on page 324. Was that intentional or did it grow from the process?
You know, what happens for me, and this has happened with each of the books, I just didn't include it in Jamie's story because the editor didn't feel, I think it was the editor, didn't feel it was such a great idea to repeat a similar pattern. But when I'm first inspired and when I first sit down, I'm given a glimpse of something that's happening and it's intense and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? And I think it's given to me that way, and then it just shuts down. And I think it's given to me that way so that I just get like, what the heck was going on there? And then I have to relax back and let the character go back and tell it their way until we get to that point. So I have to be very patient and let her tell the story her way. Yeah.
It's beautiful. CQ also asked, and I love this, do you find yourself wanting to adapt to some of the Crow ways or their expressions? For example, I will forever now give away a gift that someone else needs more.
There were so many things with the Crow people that I admired so much. That was one of them. And to see, you know, I didn't think it was a half bad idea where, as an example, the husband cannot speak directly to the mother-in-law. They need to speak through someone else, through a third party. And I thought, you know, that could save a whole lot of issues. Right? The other thing I really liked was that to show your brother how much you cared about him, that you loved him, that you respected him, you would not treat him that way. You would treat his wife that way. And I thought, wouldn't that be a good thing to have? That would prevent a whole lot of problems that a lot of us face, I think, or have faced maybe. So there were just different things like that that I really respected and thought, what great ideas. Yeah. To say nothing about, I think, no, it didn't happen yet. My daughter's just going to post about, as an example, each part of the buffalo was used. There was no waste. And one of the most recent things that she's going to post, we just looked at some pictures, was the buffalo bladder was used as a water container. And when you see how if we have need and if we're raised that way, we use everything that we have instead of being such a disposable society. So there are just so many things that we can learn if we just take the time. If we just take the time. Yeah.
I loved when you gave the list of, you know, when she said exactly what parts of the buffalo, because it was wasteful, right? When the wolfers would just leave the carcass there. You know, and I also, not only were you researching the Crow, you also had to research who they called the Stonies and why they were called the Stonies, which I found fascinating as well. How many hours do you think you accumulated researching in this? I can't even imagine, but do you have any estimate?
I have no idea. But you know, it isn't when I'm doing that, it's kind of like as a child, I was always curious,
Mhm.
but sometimes mom would say to me, you know, Kathy, you really shouldn't ask those questions. That's too personal. And the joy of doing this kind of research is that I get to ask the questions I would have always wanted to ask. So while I'm doing the research, it doesn't feel like it's a job. It's an education that I love. So through the years, I was just accumulating this knowledge, but in a very loving way, in a very, I was very blessed to have this, yeah.
Well, this is, you know, a week of thankfulness for our United States here, and I know Canada is another time period, but I just want to say I'm very thankful for your curiosity, because without that urge to give us more, you know, we wouldn't have had these three wonderful novels, and they are just such a blessing. And thank you for all the time you put into it, for all the research. I'm sure all the tears. I can't imagine having to write that fort scene. It was hard for us to read it. I can't imagine having to imagine it to get it on the page. So just want to say that we're thankful for you and your curiosity.
Okay, good. I wish my mom was alive to hear that.
Well, I'm sure she would be very proud.
She would be.
I just wanted also to say thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been such a wonderful time getting to talk with you. Please check out her website, her social media. As you heard, lots of cool stuff on the history behind all of this, and it sounds like more is coming out. So I think that's a great resource. You'll also find a book club kit for her novels there as well. So you can, she always reaches out to those book clubs. So please check those out. Next Sunday, I am going to be chatting with Patty Callahan Henry for her historical novel, Once Upon a Wardrobe. Different time period, different continent, but you'll get a feel-good holiday spirit just reading that novel. And then following that, the next Sunday, we get to talk to historical novelist Lisa C. for the Lady Tan's Circle of Women. That's also a Goodreads nominated book. So you're really going to enjoy that one as well. If you know of an author that you would like to chat with, please let me know. As I asked earlier, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, LB the Lover of Books. You can check out those past chats like we talked about with Danny Shapiro and Signal Fires, Rachel Beanland for The House is on Fire. Some really great books if you enjoy those. But thank you so much, Kathy. This has just been fantastic, and everybody, just thank you. Just, it's been so wonderful to hear what your process is like and how much you gave in this novel. But thank you.
Well, thank you, Laura. I think you know what this means to an author, because with people such as yourself and then all of the readers, we would be nowhere. So it means everything to be able to have a place like this. So thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it a lot. And I appreciate all of the readers a lot.
Definitely. We
Yeah.
love our readers and getting to discuss. Thank you again. We look forward to talking to you whenever that idea comes to you. We can't wait to see what comes next. But in the meantime, enjoy your break and enjoy the rest of this holiday weekend, everybody. Thank y'all so much for joining. Have a good evening.
Hey, you too.